All right, go for it.
Good morning, everyone. It's the one and only V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live with my main man, CJ, working the airwaves to make sure this broadcast is coming out crispy and clean. And we have with us our special guest. Oh, he's not a special guest. He's a regular. You guys know him. He needs no introduction. And if you don't know who he is, then you've clearly been buried under a rock somewhere. It's the one and only London Paul, and he is with the SiriusReport.com. And guys, for less than the price of coffee at Starbucks. And right now Starbucks is going through a whole heap of trouble here in the United States, Paul. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, I did actually.
Yes. So a lot of virtue signaling and cultural appropriation training and all that other stuff is going on right now in Starbucks. So without spending, you might say to yourself, "Hey, my local Starbucks is going to be shutting down because they're going to have cultural and sensitivity training. What do I do? What do I do with the $5 I was about to spend on a latte?" Well, this is what you do. You go to the SiriusReport.com. You join. Become a member. Become a member. You will get daily intelligence briefings from the man himself, London Paul, and you'll get it. You get it Monday through Friday. You get it all. Everything that you need to know what the heck is going on in the world. And what a value. What a value. It will keep you more enlightened, more alert, and more refreshed than that cup of coffee that you're about to buy. So, folks, rather than taking the $5 and going to Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts because now you have an alternative, well, there is an alternative. It's the SeriousReport.com. Rogue Money members and Rogue Money team are big fans of London Paul and the Serious Report, so go there and get that done. And with that being said, London Paul, what's up, buddy? How are you?
Yeah, good morning, V, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody else. Yeah, I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm hanging in there. This is day three, or not even day three. Well, yeah, almost like I don't even know how many days it's been since Friday, since the airstrikes. The world is all quiet again. I've heard that Mike Pompeo last week met with Kim Jong Un, and the summit is moving forward. That's good news, Paul.
Yeah, most definitely. I think though it's we're back to this point, and to be fair, we talked about this last year
Yeah,
in some detail, and I laid out what was going on, and the fact that the US were warned that if they launched preemptive strikes against North Korea, that their entire fleet would be sunk to the bottom of the South China Sea. And people said, well, that's impossible. Well, we fast forward to March and Putin's speech, and now you know why I said it, because
right.
militarily they are light years ahead. The other point is there was, though, definitely the US was looking at wanting regime change at one point in North Korea. Why this all came about is because Russia and China, together with North Korea, effectively laid the trap that forced Washington's hand into going, well, you know, they will denuclearize. They're agreeing to everything we've ever wanted them to do. Well, what are we going to, we can't exactly now say, well, actually, we've got, the mandate to go and have a unilateral strike or anything else. They've had to get to the negotiating table. And of course, cleverly, Kim Jong Un said, well, we've got a, nuclear arsenal. And as soon as you say that, the US take you seriously and get you to the negotiating table, which is exactly what Tehran had. Tehran doesn't have a nuclear arsenal. I think arguably, I don't think North Korea probably has, but they played the bluff game and it's worked. And that's
Right.
why the US has now sent Pompeo over, and why Kim Jong Un's going to turn up in Washington and have discussions with Trump. But of course, the US is laying out like it's all down to them. They're the ones, they've sorted North Korea out, but I'm sorry, that's not reality. And the fact I've talked about it for months, said exactly what was going to happen, and we talked about it last year, probably nearly a year ago, proves the point that it's all coming about now for that reason, not suddenly out of the blue. It's all to do with what the Washington's done. What I will say, though, however, is you commend Washington's standpoint now that they are following due process, doing the right thing. And that's hugely encouraging. That's a big slap on the back for the Trump administration. Whether their hand was forced is irrelevant. They didn't need to follow that path, but they have done, and we should commend them greatly for doing so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Paul, what else do you want to get into today? I mean, that's some good news. It's also good news that the 109 missiles literally didn't strike anything. There was no civilian casualties, which is very, very good. Makes me wonder if this whole thing was a ruse to begin with, and some sort of a distraction for another play, like i.e. North Korea, i.e. some things that are going on here domestically. What's your feeler saying? Like, what the heck is going on? Because right now there's such a fog of war. I hear all sorts of everything, and I'm just right now in a wait and see pattern. So, what are your sources telling you, Paul?
Okay, right. It's a good point to take a step back. Remember, we talked about Putin's speech to the Russian lawmakers on the 1st of March, where he laid out, look, militarily, we are light years ahead of the West. He telegraphed it. He only partially telegraphed it because, in fact, they're even further ahead than they've let on. And we said at the time, this is a catalytic moment. You will see a whole bunch of events unfolding after this. Well, what happened? Within 3 days, we had the Skripal poisoning. After that, around the 13th of March, the chief of the general staff of the Russian armed forces, who's Valery Gerasimov, said that the Russian military had reliable intelligence. And when they say they've got reliable intelligence, it usually is. And it said that the rebels holding East Ghouta, along with the white helmets, were preparing to stage and film a chemical weapons attack against civilians. Now, what we do know is around that time is there was a big move by the Syrians and the Russians to move into East Ghouta and into Duma because they were aware there was a problem, and they thwarted a number of potential chemical weapon attacks because they seized compounds and found all manner of materials which could be used to prepare chemical weapons. Of course, eventually they managed to get one to stick, and that was on the 7th of April when that false chemical weapon attack happened in Doom. There was no chemical weapons attack. It's self-evident. So within 6 days, then we have the US, the UK, and the French missile attacks. Now, let's put some theories to bed. First off, there was absolutely no chemical weapons facilities destroyed, whether they belong to the deep state, whether they belong to rebels, whether they belong to Daesh, whoever it was, because here's the basic fact. If you destroy chemical weapons facilities, there would have been enormous chemical dispersal, which probably would have even traveled as far as Israel. There was not a single trace of any chemical weapons in the atmosphere, on the ground, anywhere. So that's absolute nonsense. Secondly, there was 100+ missiles launched, only 7 hit targets. The rest were destroyed. There was many other plans to launch missiles that were thwarted. They weren't even able to launch the missiles. Now, the consequences would have been, if those missiles had hit their targets because they were strategic, it included air bases and everything else, it would have caused absolute mayhem for the Assad government, for the Russian forces, and in the process, it would have handed the initiative back in a big way, albeit maybe only temporarily, but it would have handed it back in a big way to the Daesh and the rebel forces, because in the immediate aftermath of these attacks on the 13th, what a surprise. The Daesh and these operatives went on the rampage and started trying to reassert themselves. And exactly the same thing happened on the 7th of April last year at the Sharat Air Base. Immediately, literally within an hour, they were on the rampage again, trying to reassert themselves. Lightning doesn't strike twice. It was exactly the same. So no, this was a very, very grave mistake by the US, the UK, and the French, and they will pay a big price. It won't be militarily. It will be economically. And this won't happen overnight. It will unfold in the coming weeks and months. But ultimately, they will pay a big price, because this was not some grand scheme and collusion between the US and the Russians or anyone else. Look at the language that came out of Russia. We'll come on to a wider point shortly, which I think is hugely indicative of why this has become a major problem for Western nations. What makes it even more concerning is that if we go to a few days before the 13th, when we had the airstrike by the Israelis, who still have not commented on it, which is hugely telling. But the Russians said they had the intelligence, that they carried out the attack on the Syrian T4 air base in Homs. And of course, Tel Aviv said absolutely nothing. There are reports coming out of the US, and we have to, at this point, we can't say definitively if this is the case, but there is believed to be that Netanyahu received Trump's consent to target the Iranian air defense system at that airfield and ordered the airstrike because the Israelis wanted to curb Iranian forces from using an anti-tank battery against Israeli jets. Now, it remains to be seen if that's absolutely the case. But put it this way, if it is, what does that then throws a complete kibosh on this idea that there's this big grand plan going on. But equally, and this is really important, because when I say this, people go, oh, well, you must be saying Trump's cabal. Well, no, Trump is not cabal. He never was. He never will be. And here's the reality. They've spent 18 months trying to get rid of him, finding every which way how to impeach him, and nothing's changed. They're not going to succeed, or seemingly they won't succeed. So that kiboshes the idea he's cabal. No, Trump's problem is that he's listening to advisors and getting intelligence, which we know is completely wrong. It is complete, for whatever reason. There might be legitimate people who think things are happening in Syria, or maybe there isn't. Maybe it's just nefarious individuals who are giving intelligence. We don't know. But he's getting very poor advice. And we know that he keeps rambling on about Iran and we're going to tear up the nuclear agreement. So it's maybe the idea that Netanyahu did get some consent from the Trump administration to target those Iranian bases. Maybe there's some mileage in that. That is a major, major problem. And really what we're seeing at the moment, very sadly from the West's perspective, is it boils down to four things. You've got arrogance, ignorance, and there's trust, and there's technology. And the arrogance and the ignorance is coming out of the West. I mean, you've got Munchin, who came out, was it yesterday, going, Trump's comments about the devaluation of the Chinese and Russian currencies and the threat he made about it is just giving them a warning. It's like a shot across the bows for them to toe the line in. Now, is he trying to convince you and me, or a disbelieving world that US hegemony and the US dollars, king dollars, here to stay? Or they utterly have no idea what's in reality is going on? And do you know what? It might be a bit of both. We don't know. But we're seeing this constant arrogance. It's like the comments of the way Macron's strutting around, like he now runs the European Union.
He's the equal of Putin. Did you know that?
Yeah, and I'm the equal of Putin, and and then we come to the trust issues. The major point that comes out of all this was when the Russian embassy or the ministry or someone, I'm not sure exactly who it was, came out and said, basically you have treated Putin in a disgraceful manner. That is incendiary diplomatic speak. What that basically says is we had agreements, we had things in terms of back channels, and this was after the strikes in Syria, and you have completely and utterly destroyed the trust. And what did Lavrov come out and say? He said there's no trust with the UK, all the back channels have ended. And he didn't say they were over with the US, but he basically said that, these are in sharp decline. This is a major problem. These back channels are very, very important. Now, this doesn't mean we're going to have World War III. No, we're not. Absolutely not. And the US now realize that Russia has significant military supremacy. I don't think they believed Putin, but here's the point. How exactly did a bunch of S-200s, which is 60s and 70s technology, okay, backed up by radar, which is significantly more advanced, how exactly did they manage to repel practically every single missile that was fired into Syria and caused untold problems elsewhere, which prevented missiles being launched? Now, the question, therefore, is that the US sat down and went, hang on, we're sitting ducks now. We really know we're sitting ducks. What this means is, okay, so the back channels and the trust is evaporating, but that is enough to prevent major problems happening. And when I come to the technology aspect, it's the realization, hang on, the Russians and even the Chinese militarily have significantly advanced technology. But by the way, the Chinese and the Russians have a load of other technology, which they'll roll out in the fullness of time, which is going to have a very fundamental impact in the wider world. So people can, people will have theories, have beliefs. I'm laying out facts. These are all facts. Now, in no way, shape, or form does anything I say lend itself to some grand collusion between Russia and between Russia and the US in terms of what has happened in recent weeks. We said from the 1st of March when Putin made his speech, you will see traps being laid, you will see huge events roll out. This is a catalytic event. It'll topple a bunch of dominoes in the event-driven scenario. And what we've seen in the last, now 6 weeks proves that absolutely. This is no coincidence that we had the fake chemical weapon attack. No coincidence there was a response from the US, the UK, and the French. But it is a very foolish thing to do. Extremely, because the Russians warned there will be grave consequences. And they mean it. And the Chinese will back them up. And between them, the West risks a backlash. And the backlash is coming. It's not just going to be in terms of the sanctions that already Russia's threatening, which is already making the US go, hang on, if they start to put on sanctions that they're threatening, we're going to have big problems in our industries, like, for example, nuclear power. These are serious matters. They're not joking. And frankly, it worries me that people keep believing that there's some grand plan that's going to, that's rolled out and is going to save everybody. The cabal's going. Don't get me wrong. They're finished. They're on their last legs, and it proved it with this missile attack. The desperation, when there was zero intelligence, and when you've got many ex-military personnel coming out publicly in the UK saying, hang on, why would Assad, when he's won the war virtually, suddenly decide to gas his own people? They might not like Assad, and they make, he's a nasty man and he's a horrible, repulsive individual. But they're even going, hang on, he just wouldn't do that. And they've even questioned, I've heard people questioning the role of the white helmets even. So the whole narrative is breaking down rapidly. And why? Because the realization is people are saying that there's no logic to this. It's complete nonsense. And of course, it is complete nonsense. And in the process, of course, what this is doing is then making people in the military, etc., themselves start to go, hang on a minute. Because they just follow orders. They don't necessarily agree with it. And they're going to start questioning. And at what point do we start to see people in Western militaries going, I've had enough of this, I'm going to resign, I'm going to leave, or refuse to do things? I think that's a distinct possibility, because the realization is, well, what's going to happen next? Are we going to have another region in Syria where they try to remove remnants of Daesh or the so-called rebels, and we're going to see a repeat rinse process again? And it's not beyond the boundaries of possibility, because the desperation is that great. And the question is, who's really behind all this? It's debatable. I think the UK has certainly got a big part to play in it. Has Israel got a part to play in it? Undoubtedly, because Israel's terrified of the Iranians. They think the Iranians pose a really serious threat. And that's why they launched those strikes on the Syrian T4 air base in Homs, simply because they were trying to tell the Iranians, we're not tolerating your presence in Syria. And the Iranians have threatened, they haven't done anything, but they've threatened to retaliate. Now the Israelis is counter-threatening, saying, well, we're not going to allow you to launch an attack in Israel. But Iran's not going to do that. They don't need to do that. The fact is, militarily, that aspect has ceased to have a lot of relevance. Now, the realization that Russia does possess the military capability to render missile attacks inert, then the whole theatre of war ceases to be an issue. Then it becomes a theatre of economic war. Well, who has all the weapons in that respect? It's the Chinese.
Well, we have derivatives, Paul.
But look at the Chinese response. They were absolutely furious. about those missile attacks. You know, and the Chinese don't pretend. The Chinese don't
they called
play
us
games.
lawless.
Yeah. They're absolutely livid because the basis for it, I mean, it flouts international law. Yeah, okay, it might not flout the laws of the countries because cleverly they're able to instigate missile attacks or military action, and they're not flouting any laws in their own countries. But in international law terms, absolutely. And let's face it, they did it the day before the OPCW was supposed to turn up and begin their investigations in Duma. So here's the question. If there was some grand collusion, all they had to do was wait for the OPCW to come out and say, well, actually, based on our findings, there was no chemical weapon incident here. They had no reason to then go and bomb anything or try to. The fact is, they did it the day before the OPCW was supposed to turn up in Syria. So what is that telling us? There's your answer. It's irrefutable. There is no question. This was not a grand collusion. This was an idiotic decision made by the US, the UK, and the French. And there will be repercussions, whether people like it or not. It's inevitable because the world has had enough of this bombastic approach where, the US and the UK and all these nations have no legal right to even be in Syria. The only nation who does, well, is the Russians and the Iranians were invited. No one else has any right to be there, but they are. And they're meddling and messing around in nations they shouldn't be there. And I don't doubt when Trump said, I want to pull the forces out, he wanted to. Absolutely, I don't doubt that. I think he's completely sincere. But the problem is he's in over his head in things, and we've said this before, if you're the president of the United States and you're getting harassed and harangued and huge pressure put on you saying that all this irrefutable intelligence exists, Mr. President, and on that basis we have to take action. And he sat there going, well, I'm the commander-in-chief for a nation of 350 million people, and I have to take action. The pressure cooker lid is huge. I wouldn't want to be in that position. You wouldn't be, none of us would, because then to make a decision becomes a lot harder. So I'm not criticizing Trump because I undoubtedly think he made the decision with the best intentions at heart. However, it will prove to be a really bad decision that's being made. But decisions get made, and there are consequences, and undoubtedly there will be consequences for this. But I mean, it was obvious. Putin telegraphed to the world, we have the technology, the military capability to render you inert. And do you know why they did it? Because they knew that someone would bite on it. They knew full well they'd bite on it. And they set a trap, and they fell headfirst into the trap. And we said, what do we say? They'll set traps. They set traps, and the West, the cabal, not Western people, not Western nations, but the West, they just can't help but because of their arrogance, because of their ignorance, they just have to act on it because that's just how they're programmed. And the Russians and the Chinese just say, okay, well, we can just push their buttons. And they set the trap, and they fell headfirst into it. And now, it's the old saying, act in haste.
They're very one-dimensional.
It is. They are very one-dimensional.
Yeah, very predictable.
And the question is, this has got nothing to do with Trump's credibility, Trump being cabal. It's absolute nonsense. But there has to be this understanding. It's not like it's Trump, the plan, it's all great. If he's not, he's cabal, and it's the end, and we've had it. It's neither of those. People have to stop having this black and white view of the world. There is nothing black and white about it. It is 1,000 million shades of grey, and the reality lies in the middle of this. He is not cabal. He is trying to do the right thing, but he's not succeeding because of elements within his administration who have put a huge amount of undue pressure on him. And consequently, he's made the wrong decision. That's unfortunately going to happen. I mean, I think you to compare him to Macron and May in terms of what he's trying to do, is ridiculous. Then we're not. But they, he got sucked into something which regrettably he shouldn't have done so. Because as I say, here's the proof. If the pressure must have been that great, because he would have waited for the OPCW to do that. Now, okay, we could question what verdicts the OPCW are going to come out with. But you would have just waited, and the OPCW could come out and say, do you know what? There's absolutely no evidence of any chemical weapons attack here. Assad's off the hook. There's no need to launch any missile attacks. And the point is, there are still elements within the US administration, or rogue elements, or whoever, who are trying to test whether they can maybe go back in and do something again. Absolutely. And the question is Trump, is Trump going to go with the line again? Oh, hang on. The White Helmets have found all this chemical weapons evidence. Well, here's the point. Where's all the people who were so ill in Duma? There's none of them. There's absolutely no evidence. There's people gone in independently and proved there was no chemical weapons attack. So if there was no chemical weapons attack, why launch missile? And on this basis that they destroyed chemical weapons facilities, no, they didn't. Absolutely not. Because if they had, and they would have made the matter 100 times worse, because you would have had chemical dispersal over a huge area given the missiles that were used. They just happened to get through. It's just a mere coincidence. They struck buildings and then said they were chemical weapons facilities. They weren't. They equally said every missile hit its target. Well, that's absolutely not true. We know that. We know that to be the case. So there's a lot of rhetoric come out that isn't true. And unfortunately, we have to wait and see precisely what the consequences will be. But Russia said, you do this, there's going to be consequences. Now, they obviously thought that was some kind of bluff. Well, I'm sorry to say it wasn't. And it's self-evident, because there will be there will be consequences. And the other thing, that the problem is, and we come back to this, and how often have we said this? I think we must have said it so many times we're almost blue in the face saying it, but the US, or China, is the US's biggest creditor. The two nations on the planet that the US need, and the UK for that matter, or anyone else, is to have strong, solid relations with the Chinese and the Russians, because once the cabal's gone in a post-cabal world, the West is going to need these nations to revitalize their economies and rebuild their nation. They're going to need them. Well, I think going in after being warned not to, and having strikes on Syria, are we really going to expect the Russians and the Chinese to cooperate to that level again, in a post-reset world even? Because trust is everything to the Russians and the Chinese. If they have no trust, they don't want to deal with people. Even if they know the underlying reality is that Trump isn't a cabal and he's trying to do, but actions speak louder than words. If he's the president, as far as they're concerned, their attitude will be, you didn't need to go and do this. You had enough leverage not to go to pursue this course of action. And now you've broken the trust with it. You've broken the back channels. The military in the US is probably livid about this as well, because it's self-evident. They said there's no evidence. We can't prove there was a chemical weapons attack or Assad did it. They telegraphed all this. They're saying to the world, we don't want this. Okay, the military will do as it's told and go and do it. But what's the repercussions for that? They're not happy either. This has turned into an ugly mess that risks spilling out way beyond when the cabal's gone and way into the future. I mean, what is the UK, the US, and France got to do to regain the trust of the Russians and the Chinese and 2/3 of the world who are already moved on and don't exist in this insane paradigm that we exist in the West? There are always huge consequences for actions, enormous ones, and who knows the extent of where this is going to lead. But the one thing the West needs to do, or somebody needs to do, is say, look, we're gonna have to turn the tide quickly and try and regain the trust of the Chinese and the Russians. But the language and the rhetoric coming out from Beijing and Moscow proves they have had enough. And they've reached the end of their tether with the West. And so we have to wait and see what happens. But it doesn't look particularly good from my perspective. I mean, and why should they? Why should they trust us anymore? I mean, they built up. There was far. I mean, yeah, on the surface with the Russian and the US, it looked like the relations weren't that great. But the back channels were strong. There was a lot of cooperation and understanding. Okay, the UK's forget it. I mean, the Russians and the UK, the relations have been dead and buried for a long time. But that's the UK's stupidity, and they're going to face the consequences as well. But the problem is this one incident has destroyed a lot of that trust. I mean, the trust barely exists now. I hope there's some very intelligent people in the US administration and the military who are able to say, look, okay, we acknowledge the fact that we're going to have to do something about this. We just have to hope that the cabal don't plan another crazy, insane, false flag chemical attack in Syria, and don't rule it out that they'll try it, because they'll try it. I mean, insane is a polite word to use to describe them. The chances are they might try it again. Is the US administration going to bite on it again and fall for it and go for another missile strike? Because next time, who knows what the Russians will do? I mean, they took measures in a preventative sense, which had a huge positive impact for the Syrian people, for which we should be extremely grateful. But next time, they're going to be quite so forgiving, and so next time they may go on the offensive. And the US has no capability. The UK has no capability. And no, it's not World War III. Absolutely not. But this is the risk. So I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but frankly, from my perspective as a UK citizen, I am appalled by the actions of my government. Frankly, it's an utter embarrassment. And there's no other word to describe it. And I don't often get angry about things, but I am very angry about this. Have you ever heard me be like this before on the radio? Never. And I'm not doing this for effect. I'm doing it because it concerns me. It is a ridiculously stupid thing to have done. And the people who will be affected is the likes of you and me. Whether we're in the US, whether in the UK, whatever. We have to bear the brunt of the consequences of these actions. And who knows what they'll end up being. But yeah, I am very, very angry about it.
You know what kills me the most, Paul, is the reckless irresponsibility of this, the recklessness of dialogue, the recklessness of action, the recklessness of continuing on a pathway of insanity. I've never seen insanity. See, during the Cold War, there was some sort of logic, some sort of reason. Now it's reacting to things via whatever the dictates or dictum of social media, of false reports. No investigation needed. You are guilty before you're even found innocent, and immense, massive recklessness. I've never seen this before, ever.
No, I mean, we know why. We said a long time ago, look, as the cabal starts to completely implode, then, all bets are off and madness will ensue, and they'll try anything and everything. I mean, and there's also, but the problem is, look at the fact the OPCW are now saying that their security team were also attacked in Syria's Duma. So I mean, why would anyone do that? Well, we know the reasons why. And they can't spin that as though it's the Assad and the Russians. So why are these Daesh operatives or so-called rebels wanting to attack the OPCW? Well, we know why, because they don't want them to find the truth. And then the problem is the US, I mean, Trump is saying, well, I want to pull the troops out, and I genuinely believe he does, because he knows it's insane being there. He knows that the US gets no benefit from being there. It's costing lives. It's costing the US trillions of dollars of pointless wars, and he wants them to come home and bring an end to it. But then, what do we find out? The US has set up a new military facility in Deir ez-Zor, not far from one of the last sort of strangleholds stranglehold in inverted commas, that Daesh has got in Syria. And the region's also known for being rich in oil. We know that part over the, but you go east of the Euphrates, has quite rich oil reserves. I mean, what is going on there? That is a completely contradictory statement to what Trump's saying. Why are they building a new military facility in that region of Syria? I mean, these are the questions that
Paul, they're just trying to spread freedom and democracy, Paul. Why can't you understand that?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what's wrong with you, Paul?
I know.
Can't you sense all the freedom
of me? Yeah, and the thing is, what is this? The irony is in all this. What has this done? All this is done is cemented the Syrian people's desire to see Assad remain in power. Not that I'm sad that Assad shouldn't. It's up to the Syrian people to elect him. And Assad himself has said, if they don't want me as their president anymore, then vote me out and I'll go. But they and their love and appreciation for what the Russians have done and the Iranians is enormous. And look at the reaction from the Syrian people to the US as a result, and the UK as a result of it. They weren't unfurling American and UK flags. There was actually some pretty strong rhetoric put up in stadiums with FU America and FU US and et cetera, in the UK. The Syrian people themselves are livid about this. They're furious.
Paul, that's how we win hearts and minds, Paul. Can't you see that?
And you know the worst part is, all this has done is it's angered the Russians, it's angered the Chinese, it's angered Assad, it's angered the Syrian people. And the weird, of course, insane irony is it's also angered Daesh and angered the rebels, because they're saying, what a useless bunch of missile targeting you did. And what are they likely to do? The risk is they may now go, well, we've had it, and they may actually turn on the Americans themselves, the forces out there, and start trying to kill them as well. So you're putting more American forces in jeopardy in the process of the insane thing. And at the end of the day, that's what I care about: human lives. I don't give a damn about governments. I have no interest in politics. I care about humanity. And even if they don't care about the Syrians, and they don't care about it, they should care about their own forces. And I'm not saying they should, because they should care about every single person in Syria. But the point is, they also risk endangering their own forces because of their actions. And I mean, so as you say, reckless is being polite.
Yeah. I think the more appropriate word is idiotic.
Well, we could use some very strong language in this regard, but we won't, because I don't like swearing anyway. It doesn't articulate things. No. But it's the problem is, we will start to see a response from, and I mean, what are we already seeing? I mean, are we seeing a de-escalation in the trade war between the Chinese and the US? No, absolutely not. I mean, what's come out today is the US is starting a new investigation into whether steel wheels produced in China are illegally dumped in the US. Now, an investigation was carried out because I think 2 vehicle component makers, suppliers in the US, requested it. And what also are they doing? They're saying that producers of alloy aluminium sheets imported from China enjoy anti-competitive state subsidies in the process. So there's no end to this. And the Chinese are not going to sit there and go, well, do you know what? We'll just do nothing. All they should have done is sat down with the Chinese and gone, we've got major problems in this country. We need trillions of dollars to rebuild our roads, our bridges. and all the key infrastructure, our rail network. Because do you know what? We'd really like to join the One Belt, One Road and have it all across North America, stretching down into Central America and through to South America. It was a win-win situation for the US. And let the US find alternative and additional export markets in the Americas. And who do we need to finance this? Oh, I know, the very people that we're deciding to slap around the face every 5 minutes with more trade wars, of actually what seems to be brewing into a trade war. And China is the biggest creditor. China, ironically, is the one thing that can finance things. Who else in the world is going to finance the trillions of dollars the US needs to rebuild its nation? And even when the cabal's gone, as we said, do we expect the Chinese are just going to go, oh, well, fine, we'll just finance you now? No, because the trust is gone. How long is it going to take to regain that trust? I don't know. Who knows what is got to be done to regain that trust? Because, as we said, for the Chinese to come out in their media with really strong rhetoric against all this, it wasn't a very polite diplomatic approach. They're furious, and they're telling their people, we're furious with the actions of the US, the UK, and France. So you just don't do that. It's just we said from day one, no one wins in a trade war, and ultimately the US will lose far more than the Chinese. The Chinese will already make plans. They're already probably aware it was going to happen. They'll start to tweak their economy in a way to prevent it being a major problem. But they can withstand it far better than the US can as well. I mean, you're not only going to you might hit the Chinese, but you're going to start damaging internal, US trade and the competitiveness of companies. And okay, so you slap tariffs on steel wheels. Well, who's that ultimately going to affect? The US consumer. They're going to bear the brunt of the cost. So how is this trade war benefiting the people of the United States? Not one jot, in any way, shape, or form. It is totally counterproductive. And the basic bottom line is, and Trump needs to stop doing this, stop treating nations like they're a business deal. Yeah, you can go and haggle over business, and I don't doubt he's extremely good at doing that. But you can't start treating a nation like China like it's a business deal and going, well, you're going to have to cooperate with us, and if you don't, well, we'll just slap some tariffs on you. It doesn't work like that. I mean, it's self-evident it's not going to work. And notice the one good thing he did was they were supposed to implement more sanctions on Russia on Monday, and they went, no, we're not doing that now. Because maybe finally the realization is you can put as many sanctions on a nation as you want, but ultimately, as the Russians have proved, it's going to blow back in your face. And no, it's not some grand scheme to go, oh, well, if we do all this, it'll destroy the cabal. Well, yes, it might destroy the cabal, but in the process, it's going to put back the recovery of the US by months or years or whatever it might be. We have no way of determining that.
Exactly. Paul, what do you see coming down right now with everything that's happening? Specifically, you got oil prices on the move, you got interest rates on the move. China just did a tariff, 179% tariff on U.S. sorghum. Things are getting a little crazy, buddy. What's your take?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, economically, and this is the other problem. We set this whole economic reality that's happening in the US, and then in the UK is exactly the same. It's like, oh, well, we're just going to start raising interest rates. Well, if you raise interest rates, you're going to kill the economy. And that's the other thing. Trump needs to stop saying, oh, we've got such a great, strong economy, because he's digging his own grave by doing so. The US economy is extremely weak. Raising interest rate is going to kill the US economy even more. All it's going to do is add more debt on top of debt. What does it do to the US debt repayment? It's going to add tens of billions of hundreds of billions of dollars to their interest repayments. What's it going to do to the average homeowner? What's it going to do to the average business? I mean, the whole Western world is leveraged on debt. I know, let's just increase the debt even more because, hey, that's a really intelligent way of approaching things. Absolutely not. In terms of oil, well, I still maintain at some point the oil price will collapse. I mean, currently it's kind of over $60 a barrel. I mean, it suits the Russians fine. The Russians survived when it was $25. The Russian can survive when it's 20 or 15. So can the Iranians even more. And they produce oil at $6 a barrel. The only reason the oil price is benefiting the US, but the shale oil industries are now in decline. The major producers are starting to have depleted wells. So, and in the end, and of course, raising interest rate, what's that going to do to the shale oil industry? Backed by junk bonds, it's going to cause them to collapse. So it's of no benefit to the US economy to raise interest rate or the UK. So, and there needs to be some serious discussion inside the administration, the Treasury, going, hang on, let's just cut the crap and start dealing with the reality of what our economy is. Because if we do this, we're just going to kill ourselves in the process. And the same to the UK when they're talking about raising interest rates. And as much as it's ridiculous that the UK economy seems to be so dependent on the housing market, but for the first time since 2009, we're seeing a decline in the housing market and in the prices in London. That is always normally an indicator of a recession. Now, we've never got out of recession, but we're talking about the mother of all recessions that'll come as a result of this. And we now seem to be there. We're in the crosser. All the economic indicators prove this. So what does the Bank of England talk about? Well, we're thinking of raising interest rates as well. And you know, the worst thing is it's not some capitalist plan to take down and destroy the economies. It's just they simply don't have a clue what to do. They are absolutely clueless. I mean, back in 2006, it was obvious we were going to have a 2008 collapse because you could see the things were cratering in the housing market. You could see subprime. It was obvious. I mean, yeah, people have watched the film The Big Short, but it was known. People knew what was coming. But on the surface, it was always told, oh, the stock market's riding high in 2007. Okay, the wheels started to fall off slightly. But we're going through the same process again. And then when it all happens, they'll sit there and go, oh, we didn't know any. We really didn't know this was going to happen.
We never saw this coming. We never saw this coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a complete shock to us. Well, it's not a shock to anyone. And anyone who listens here, or us, or and numerous other people who've talked about this, it's a fait accompli that we're just revisiting it all over again. And that's why even more so. I mean, if the US had a strong economy and it was doing well and it started to play a bit of hardball with the Chinese, you might go, well, okay, maybe not the greatest thing to do, but hey, maybe some good will come out of it. But when you're weak, you don't start trying to fight your biggest creditor, and it comes back to this arrogance and ignorance, and the comment that Trump's giving warning to the Russians and the Chinese that this currency devaluation game we're not going to tolerate it. I mean, and I think the reality is
the biggest currency devaluators in the entire world. It's us.
Yeah. Well, look at what's happened to the dollar in the last 100 years.
Yeah, we are the.
You want to talk about
devaluation? There you go.
Yeah, if you want to talk about devaluation, look at what's happened to look at the dollar's worth about 2% of what it was 100 years ago.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, Paul. It's like, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. 98%. And when we tell people the last remaining 2% is something that they're going to lose, they look at you incredulously. It's incredible. It really is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But this is the reality. This is why we come back to what I said the 4 points were, is the arrogance and the ignorance, the trust and the technology. And unfortunately, the West is arrogance and ignorance in equal measure. And the trust is something that straddles the two. And then we have the technology, which is a lot of new technology that come out. It's the One Belt, One Road. It's the multipolar world. But it's all technologically driven. And And I said, and I had quite a bit of people scathing and laughing at me for suggesting what's going to happen to Africa as a continent. But will you watch what happens when Africa as a continent is completely regenerated? And do you know what? I wouldn't even be surprised in 10 years' time if Africa has a far more vibrant economy as a continent than the West does. And I'm really serious about this.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
10
very
years is
possible.
too soon, maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years. But there is going to be huge investment into Africa as a continent
I mean, at the end of the day,
to,
Paul,
to regenerate it.
yeah, the real deal is that we are a descending civilization. We are falling apart, and we're on a descending track. While many nations around the world, many other civilizations are actually ascending. Many countries are coming up as we're crashing down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and the one thing, of course, is the African continent is being its problem is because of Western colonialism and the West putting in a bunch of puppet governments, and their nations are being bled dry. They've been treated abysmally for generations, and the Chinese and the Russians recognize this and go, well, this has to end. They have it's through no fault of their own what's happened to them as a continent. Now, people will argue and say, well, yeah, and equally, it's no fault of the people of the West and the UK, the US for what's gone on. Absolutely, but the big difference is these African nations haven't gone round blowing half the world up in the process and trying to impose their will on them. That's the big difference. It Yeah, there is degrees of trust. There is no trust in terms of the insanity that runs a lot of African nations and the governments. But it's a world of difference between having trust or trust that in principle, not that it ever would, but if you follow it through, trust goes out the window when you launch missile attacks that with no known understanding what the consequences could be, what the response was going to be. You can make assumptions, but anything could have happened. And we come back to the point, you have to throw the Iranians into the mix. You have to throw the Saudis. You have to throw the Israelis. There's a huge bunch of variables in the equation. We had no idea what the response could have been. It could have turned into a huge, far worse shit show than it's actually happened. And that's another reason why you don't coordinate collusion with nations and start launching huge missile attacks. I'm sorry, there's absolutely zero logic to that. That's about as illogical as saying that Assad is going to launch chemical weapons attacks on his people just as he's winning the war. They're both as illogical. It makes absolutely zero sense. You wouldn't do that.
Yeah, you're right. Unless there's some sort of something else going on in the background that we right now don't know about. That's what I'm in because none of this makes any sort of sense, Paul. To be quite honest with you.
No. I mean, I would agree. But
can they be this
when
stupid?
you follow through everything we've discussed and the chronology of events, and you reflect back on what we've discussed in the past, everything is coming to pass exactly how we said it would come to pass. So either we're very right about most things and completely wrong about something else. Now, yes, there are possibilities, but the rhetoric coming out of Russia and China doesn't exactly suggest to me that it's a bed of roses and everything's going to be fine. Ultimately, yes, the cabal will be eviscerated. Eventually, the cabal will go, and who knows what will happen in the process in the aftermath of that. But at the moment, there is no evidence that Russia and China are taking this lightly. And the question is, for how long are they going to say, well, okay, we'll forgive and forget and move on from this? I mean, that's probably the $64 million question is, are they going to in the future just say, okay, well, we appreciate this out, or will they continue to follow through on their promises of grave consequences? The one thing Russia does, it doesn't say something unless it means it and it intends to follow through with it. That should be the concern. And it is my concern because, and the thing is, They'll do things intelligently. They don't just rush in and throw bombs at people and say, this is how we're going to control the situation, because they don't need to anymore. They have the military supremacy. And if no one wants to believe that, okay, just tell me how exactly a bunch of S-200s managed to defeat the incoming threat from missile attacks by over 95%. Never mind the ones that never actually even got off the ground, or the ones that were misfired, or the ones that went missing that were never accounted for. Because there's a whole bunch of other things in that mix. So the question is, if they can deal with that, that proves they have the military advantage. Because imagine if the Syrians had S-400s, or even S-300s. And that's the other thing, that to be fair to the Russians, they said to the Americans and the Western allies a few years ago, we respect your view on the fact of giving the Syrians S-300 technology, because, so we won't give it to them. They said, in light of the recent missile attacks, we're revisiting that, and we might now seriously give consideration to giving the Syrians S-300s. Oh, by the way, we'll give it to Lebanon as well, Iraq, and Iran, and so on and so on. Does that strike me as a nation who's colluding with the West? No, they're actually saying we're going to defend these nations even more so, because, and there isn't a grand scheme. They're not like some game where we're going, well, actually, it's just a game, don't worry, we're just doing this to convince the cabal. And here's the bottom line. If there's a great big plan being unfolded, why is it known in public? Why are you and I discussing a 4D chess game that's existing in the world, and somehow the cabal don't know about this? They don't know that there was some grand collusion happening in Syria between various parties? If I know about it and you know about it, the cabal don't know this. So don't you think they would act on that and say, well, hang on a minute, we're being played like dummies here, we're not going to tolerate this, we're going to do something about this? That's where the whole logic of that argument collapses in a heap. Because if there was some grand plan that no one knew about and wasn't being discussed, then fair enough. You could say, well, maybe there's a possibility. But if it's out there in Twitter land and in social media, if we know about it, the cabal knows about it. So therefore, if there was some great big ruse going on in Syria, well, guess what? They know about it. So what advantage does that achieve? You're just telling them, we're making a fool of you.
Yeah.
No.
Paul,
sorry, I just don't see any. If someone can tell me to the contrary and present an alternative narrative that makes sense, great. Yeah. Please get in touch and tell me, because I don't see any logic to it otherwise. I just don't.
Paul, we're at the end of the show. Thank you so much for coming on with us and sharing all these highlights and insights that you have given us. And folks, again, the website is thesiriusreport.com. That's Sirius Report spelled SIRIUS, thesiriusreport.com. With that being said, we're over and out. Take it away, El Cuco.